My parents changed the locks in my own house while I was at work. Can find somewhere else to live, my mom smiled sweetly. Your sister and her family will be moving here in a month, my dad muttered. So I left in silence. I was enjoying my coffee break at the small cafe across from my office building when my phone rang. Mom's name flashed on the screen and I almost choked on my latte. We hadn't spoken in months, which wasn't unusual. We'd never been close. Kelly, hello dear. Her voice came through, unnaturally gentle. Hi Mom, I said, stirring my coffee nervously. This is unexpected. I just wanted to check how you're doing after the divorce. Must have been difficult. I sighed, feeling the familiar ache in my chest. Only 2 weeks had passed since I'd finalized my divorce from Mark after finding him in bed with his coworker. The memory still stung. Yeah. It's been rough, I admitted, but I'm managing. At least I got to keep the house. Mark didn't fight me on it. I think his guilt worked in my favor. Listen, Mom interrupted before I could continue. Your father and I miss you terribly. Why don't you come over for dinner this Saturday? It's been too long since we've had a family meal. The invitation caught me off guard. In the 5 years I've been married to Mark, my parents had invited us over maybe twice, always keeping conversations surface level and short. I accepted. Curiosity getting the better of me. After hanging up, I sat there puzzled. My parents had never been the warm, inviting type. Growing up, my older sister Lisa had always been the golden child, the one with straight A's, the one who married right after college, the one who gave them grandchildren. I was just Kelly, the afterthought. Saturday arrived quickly. I pulled into my parents' driveway, noting that their modest ranch-style home needed a fresh coat of paint. Dad opened the door before I could knock. Kelly, come in, he said with unusual enthusiasm, pulling me into an awkward hug. Mom appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. You're right on time, dinner's almost ready. The table was set with the good china, the set they usually reserved for Thanksgiving and Christmas. Something was definitely up. As we ate, they bombarded me with questions. So how's work going at the marketing firm? Dad asked. Fine. I'm up for a promotion next month, I said, cutting into my chicken. And what do you do in your free time now? Mom chimed in. Any new hobbies? I shrugged. Not really. Just been focused on getting through each day. The divorce took a lot out of me. Of course, dear, Mom said, patting my hand sympathetically. But you're young. You'll bounce back. They exchanged glances before Dad cleared his throat. So, what are your plans for the house? There it was. The real reason for the dinner invitation. I'm going to live in it, I said flatly. I'm planning to renovate next year once I've saved up a bit. Mom's eyes lit up. Renovation, how timely you should mention that. I set down my fork. What do you mean? Well, Dad began, leaning forward. Your mother and I have decided to completely renovate our house. The plumbing needs updating, and the electrical wiring isn't up to code anymore. That's good, I said cautiously. Your house could use some work. The thing is, Mom continued, we need somewhere to stay during the renovation. It could take several months. My stomach tightened as I realized where this was heading. Lisa's place is already crowded with the kids, Dad added, and renting would be such a waste of money. Mom reached across the table and squeezed my hand. We were hoping you might let us stay at your house. It's so big, and you have all that space just for yourself. I wanted to say no immediately. The thought of my parents invading my personal space made my skin crawl. We'd never gotten along well, and after years of feeling second best to Lisa, I'd come to value my independence. But looking at their expectant faces, I hesitated. Maybe this could be a chance to finally build a better relationship with them. And my house was spacious, a 4-bedroom colonial with plenty of room. I guess that would be okay, I said slowly. When would you need to move in? Next week, Mom suggested eagerly. The contractors are starting on Monday. We'd be so grateful, Kelly, Dad said. It would help us tremendously. Against my better judgment, I nodded. All right, you can stay with me until your renovation is complete. The relief and joy on their faces seemed genuine, making me wonder if I'd misjudged their intentions. Maybe they really did want to reconnect, and this living arrangement would give us that opportunity. Thank you, honey, Mom said, her eyes watering slightly. This means the world to us. 1 week later, my parents arrived at my doorstep with several suitcases. Dad carried a box of personal items, while Mom clutched a bag full of her favorite kitchenware. "Welcome," I said. Holding the door open, I prepared the guest room upstairs for you both. "This is so kind of you, Kelly," Mom said, kissing my cheek as she passed. "We promise not to be a bother." As I helped them settle in, I tried to ignore the nagging feeling in my gut that I might regret this decision. But I pushed those thoughts aside. How bad could it be? It was only temporary after all. The first few weeks of living with my parents were surprisingly smooth. I left for work each morning around 8 and didn't return until after 6, which limited our interaction to evenings and weekends. To my amazement, Mom had dinner waiting for me when I got home, something I hadn't experienced since childhood. "How was work today?" she'd ask as I hung up my coat and kicked off my heels. "Busy but productive," I'd reply, sinking into a chair at the kitchen table. Dad would usually be in the living room watching the news, offering a casual wave as I passed by. On weekends they'd leave early to check on the renovation progress at their house, giving me space to breathe and maintain some semblance of my normal routine. "The contractor says they've gutted the bathroom," Dad reported one Sunday evening when they returned. "Found some water damage that needs addressing. Sounds like it's going to take longer than expected," I commented, trying to keep the concern out of my voice. Mom nodded. "These things always do. But we're so grateful to have somewhere comfortable to stay." I smiled tightly, happy to help. But the peaceful coexistence didn't last long. The first sign of trouble came on a Saturday morning when I turned on some Beethoven while cleaning the kitchen. Mom appeared in the doorway, her face pinched. "Kelly, would you mind turning that down or better yet, off? I've got a terrible migraine starting." "Oh sure," I said, reaching for the speaker. "I just always cling to classical music." "Well, when you live alone, you can do whatever you want," she replied. "But when you have guests, you need to be considerate." I bit my tongue to keep from pointing out that they weren't exactly guests. They had asked to stay in my home, and I had graciously accommodated them. Instead, I finished cleaning in silence. The next issue arose when my friend Jen stopped by on a Tuesday evening with takeout and a bottle of wine. "This is so nice," I said as we settled on the couch with our food. "I've been meeting a girls' night." We were halfway through our second glass of wine when Dad cleared his throat from the hallway. "Kelly, it's nearly 9, he said pointedly. "Your mother and I are trying to relax before bed." Jen looked at me with raised eyebrows. I gave her an apologetic smile. "Sorry, Dad. We'll keep it down." After Jen left, Mom approached me in the kitchen. "Honey, we're not trying to be difficult, but having visitors after 6 in the evening is disruptive. We're old, and we need our quiet time." "I understand," I said, though I didn't. "I'll tell my friends not to come over for a while." The restrictions continued to pile up. They complained about the groceries I bought, why waste money on organic, the hardness of their mattress, we're both having back pain, and even how I loaded the dishwasher. That's not how you arrange the plates. Each day, I felt more like a stranger in my own home. I wanted to scream that they could find somewhere else to live if my house wasn't up to their standards. But I kept quiet. This arrangement was temporary. I just needed to endure it a little longer. Then one afternoon, I came home to find 2 children racing through my living room. Aunt Kelly, my 7-year-old niece Maya, shouted when she saw me. Her 5-year-old brother Jake continued to run circles around the coffee table. I looked around in confusion. "Where's your mom?" "In the kitchen with Grandma," Maya replied before dashing off again. I found Lisa and my mother chatting over coffee, completely unbothered by the chaos echoing from the other room. "Hey sis," Lisa said casually. "Hope you don't mind us dropping by." "Of course not," I lied. "I just wasn't expecting company." Mom waved her hand dismissively. "I told Lisa you wouldn't mind. Your house has so much space for the kids to play, unlike that cramped apartment they're in." What started as a one-time visit quickly became routine. Soon my parents were picking up Maya and Jake from school and bringing them to my house until Lisa could collect them after work, often as late as 9 or 10 at night. I'd arrive home exhausted, craving peace and quiet, only to find my living room transformed into a playground. Toys scattered everywhere, sticky fingerprints on my furniture, and my parents making no effort to control their grandchildren's behavior. "They're just being kids," Mom would say when I suggested they might tone it down. "Children need to express themselves." Weekends became even worse. Lisa, her husband Tom, and the kids would spend entire days at my house. The adults would chat while the children ran wild, and I'd retreat to my bedroom feeling like an unwelcome intruder in my own home. One evening, after Lisa had finally taken her children home, I approached my parents in the living room. "I know you enjoy seeing the kids." I began carefully. "But I need some downtime after work. Maybe they could visit less often?" Dad looked up from his newspaper with a frown. "Their family, Kelly, family should always be welcome." "I'm not saying they aren't welcome," I clarified. "I'm just asking for some boundaries." Mom exchanged a look with Dad. "We'll see what we can do." But nothing changed. If anything, the visits increased, and I found myself dreading the drive home each day. I consoled myself with the thought that my parents' renovation would eventually be completed, and life would return to normal. Then came the Saturday that changed everything. Mom announced she was hosting a family dinner at my house. Lisa, Tom, and the kids arrived at 5, and we all gathered around my dining table. Throughout the meal, I noticed my parents and Lisa exchanging meaningful glances. The atmosphere felt charged, like they were all in on some secret I wasn't privy to. As we finished dessert, Dad cleared his throat. "Kelly, we need to have a serious conversation with you." I set down my fork, anxiety bubbling in my stomach. "It's about Lisa and her family," Mom began. "They're facing some financial difficulties right now. The rent on their apartment keeps increasing. It's becoming unsustainable for them." I could see where this was heading, but I desperately hoped I was wrong. "We were thinking," Mom said, reaching across to pat my hand, "that since you have all this space, maybe Lisa and her family could move in temporarily, just until they get back on their feet." My mouth fell open as I stared at my parents and sister. I looked at Lisa, who was giving me what I assumed was supposed to be a helpless, pleading look. The same look she'd used our entire childhood to get her way. "No," I said flatly. "Absolutely not." The table fell silent. 4 pairs of eyes stared at me in disbelief, as if my refusal was completely unexpected. Lisa was the first to break the silence. "What do you mean, no?" Her voice rose sharply. "You live here all alone, Kelly. This house is way too big for just one person." "It's my house," I replied, feeling my temper rising. "I get to decide who lives in it." "But we're family," Mom said, her eyes wide with shock. "We support each other. I have supported you," I countered. "I've let you and Dad stay here rent-free for weeks. I've allowed my house to become a daycare center for Maya and Jake. I put up with having my life completely disrupted." Mom's hand flew to her chest, her face contorting into an expression of wounded dignity. "I never thought my own daughter would throw our living situation in our faces like this." "That's not what I'm doing," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm simply establishing a boundary." "Boundaries?" Lisa scoffed. "That's just selfish talk. You have all this space, and you're living here alone, while we're crammed into a 2-bedroom apartment with 2 growing kids. Then maybe you should have thought about that before having children you can't afford," I snapped. Lisa gasped. "How dare you? Not everyone can be a childless divorcee with a big empty house." "I earned this house," I said through gritted teeth. "I worked hard, I made smart choices. And most importantly, it's mine. Mine to decide who lives in it." "So that's it?" Dad asked. "You won't help your own sister in her time of need?" I looked at each of their faces, the disappointment, the judgment, the entitlement. For years I'd been trying to earn their approval, to be seen as valuable as Lisa. But now I realized I didn't need their approval. I needed my peace of mind. "That's it," I confirmed. "Lisa and her family are not moving in. This discussion is over." I stood up and walked to my bedroom, closing the door firmly behind me. I could hear the muffled sounds of their continued conversation, no doubt dissecting my selfishness and cruelty. I didn't care. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I'd stood up for myself. The next morning, I woke to a silent house. When I went to the kitchen, neither of my parents acknowledged my presence. Mom, who had been making me breakfast since they moved in, was sipping her coffee and pointedly reading a magazine. Dad was busy with his crossword puzzle. "Good morning," I tried. Silence. Fine. If they wanted to act like children, that was their choice. I made my own breakfast and headed to work. That evening, I returned to find no dinner waiting. The pattern continued for days. My parents moved through the house like ghosts, speaking to each other but never to me. Lisa stopped bringing the kids over, which was the one silver lining to the whole situation. A week into this silent treatment, I was actually starting to enjoy the peace. If this was their idea of punishment, they had seriously miscalculated. I'd lived alone for weeks after Mark moved out, and had grown to appreciate the solitude. Friday morning, I left for work as usual. The day was busy, with back-to-back meetings keeping me at the office later than planned. When I finally pulled into my driveway around 7:30 p.m., I was looking forward to a quiet evening with a glass of wine and maybe a movie. I inserted my key into the front door lock, but it wouldn't turn. Thinking I'd mixed up my keys, I tried again. Nothing. "What the hell?" I muttered, trying a third time before the realization hit me. The locks had been changed. I rang the doorbell, then knocked loudly. After a minute, I saw my mother's face peek through the side window. She opened the door just enough for the security chain to pull taut. "Yes," she said, as if I were a stranger. "Mom, what's going on?" "My key doesn't work." "Oh, that?" she said casually. "We had the locks changed today." My jaw dropped. "You changed the locks to my house without telling me?" Dad appeared behind her. "We've been thinking, Kelly. You really don't need all this space, and Lisa's family is struggling. It makes more sense for them to live here." "Are you insane?" I spluttered. "You can't just take over my house." "We're not taking it over," Mom corrected. "We're just making better use of the space. Lisa and her family will be moving in next month." I stood there, dumbfounded by their audacity. "Let me in, right now." "This is illegal." "It's a family matter," Dad said dismissively. "You have plenty of money. You can find somewhere else to live." "Do you really think I won't call the police?" I threatened. Mom smiled condescendingly. "You wouldn't call the police on your own parents. They really believed I would just roll over and let them steal my house. The house I'd fought for in the divorce, the house I'd been paying the mortgage on for years. "I'll be spending the night at a hotel," I said, my voice eerily calm despite the rage boiling inside me. "We can discuss this tomorrow when I've had time to think." Relief flooded my mother's face. "That's a very mature decision, Kelly. I knew you'd come around." As I walked back to my car, I heard the door close behind me. They thought they'd won. They thought I was giving up. They couldn't have been more wrong. I drove to the nearest hotel, checked in, and immediately called James Brennan, the lawyer who had handled my divorce. His voicemail picked up, and I left an urgent message explaining the situation. While waiting for his callback, I paced the hotel room, alternating between disbelief and fury. How could my own parents do this to me? Did they really think they could get away with it? My phone rang just as I was considering calling the police directly. "Kelly, it's James. I got your message." "Are you okay?" "Not really," I admitted. "My parents have illegally taken over my house. They changed the locks while I was at work and won't let me in." "That's absolutely illegal," James confirmed. "They have no right to do that, regardless of how long they've been staying with you. You're well within your rights to call the police." "That's what I thought," I said, feeling vindicated. But part of me worried I was overreacting. "You're not," he assured me. "This is criminal trespass and possibly burglary depending on your state laws. Call the police, file a report, and if you need me to represent you legally afterward, I'm here." I thanked him and ended the call, feeling a strange mix of determination and sadness. I never imagined I'd have to involve law enforcement in a dispute with my own family. But they had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Looking at the clock, I saw it was 9 p.m. Late enough that my parents would likely be settling in for the night, perhaps even congratulating themselves on their clever plan. Perfect timing for a wake-up call. I drove straight to the police station. The night shift officer looked up as I approached the front desk. "I need to report an illegal seizure of property," I said. "My parents have changed the locks to my house and are refusing to let me in." The officer nodded and gestured for me to sit. "I'll need to see some identification and proof of ownership." I pulled out my driver's license and opened my phone to access the digital copies of my deed and mortgage documents. I explained the whole situation, how I'd allowed my parents to stay temporarily during their renovation, and how they'd changed the locks while I was at work and refused me entry. After making my official statement, I left my phone number with the police for communication. "I'll be staying at the Hampton Inn on 5th Street, I told them. I went back to the hotel and tried to relax, but sleep was impossible as I replayed the events of the day. Around midnight, the hotel phone rang. "Miss Richards, this is Officer Daniels from the police department. I'm calling about your house situation." I sat up immediately. "Yes. What happened?" "We were forced to detain your parents, ma'am. They resisted our officers and used insulting language when we explained they were illegally occupying your property. They're currently at the police station." My stomach dropped despite everything. "They're in jail?" "In holding cells, yes. When would you be able to come to the station?" I glanced at the clock. It was already past midnight. "I can come in the morning. First thing." After hanging up, my cell phone immediately began ringing, my parents and sister calling repeatedly. I didn't answer any of the calls and simply turned off my phone. I needed space to think clearly without their manipulation. The next morning, I turned my phone back on and was bombarded with notifications, dozens of missed calls and messages from my parents and Lisa. I scrolled through a few of the messages. "How could you do this to your own parents? We raised you. Mom is crying in a cell because of you. You're cruel and heartless. Withdraw your statement now. Family helps family. You're no longer my sister." I put the phone away, refusing to let their guilt tactics work on me. When I arrived at the police station, my parents were still there, having stayed all night. They looked terrible, disheveled and exhausted. Mom's eyes were red and puffy from crying, and she started sobbing again when she saw me. Dad just looked angry and defeated. For a moment, pity threatened to overtake me. These were my parents after all. But then I remembered how brazenly they had planned to steal my house, how entitled they felt to take what was mine simply because they wanted it. I suppressed my pity and stood firm. "I'm ready to withdraw my statement on one condition," I told the police officer while looking directly at my parents. "They need to take their things and move out of my house immediately today." "Yes, fine," Dad said quickly, desperation replacing his anger. "Whatever you want, Kelly." Mom nodded frantically through her tears. "We'll go right now. Just please drop the charges." The police issued them a fine for resisting and insulting officers, then released them. I demanded that they move out immediately, and they readily agreed. In the station parking lot, Lisa was waiting, pacing anxiously beside her car. When she saw our parents emerge, she rushed forward to help them. She sat them in her car, turned to glare at me with pure hatred in her eyes, and then they drove off toward my house. I followed in my car to make sure they actually went there. Once at my house, my parents immediately began to pack their things. They worked quickly and silently, loading everything into their car in the garage. Within an hour, they were ready to leave. They drove away without saying goodbye to me, not even a glance in my direction as they pulled out of the driveway. As soon as they left, I called a locksmith and had all the locks changed. I decided firmly that I would not let anyone else from my family into my home ever again. A few days later, I received a text message from my mother. "I no longer consider you a member of this family. We do not want to communicate with you anymore." I stared at the message and breathed a sigh of relief. The feeling wasn't sadness or regret, it was freedom. I didn't want to communicate with them either. Their constant demands, their favoritism toward Lisa, their sense of entitlement to my home and my life, I was finally free of it all. Now I live quietly in my house alone. I have my own life, free from their criticism and demands. I don't communicate with my parents or my sister, and honestly, my life is so much more peaceful for it. Sometimes I wonder if I should feel guilty about how things ended, but then I remember that I didn't create this situation. I merely refused to be manipulated and taken advantage of. My home is truly mine again, and for the first time in years, I feel completely at peace.